All right, guys. So if you're like me and you got in this hobby using something like this was my original BSG. Bought the kit. I think my wife and my parents went together in this, so it was $100 maybe from BSG. So it came with the bottling bucket, came with a carboy, a couple of airlocks, some basic things to get started. And over a course of time, made quite a bit of beer with this. Obviously added some carboys, tried PET because these are heavy and slippery. They drop glass shards, that type of stuff. Really, really good for oxygen, not allowing it to permeate into, but there are some downsides to that. So as you move along in this hobby, you start looking, going, all right, what else is out there for fermenters? So I went into the big mouth bubbler, the plastic style of this with a big open neck into it. I still had the spigot at the bottom, which is really nice. And as you learn more and more, you start looking at going, well, oxygen get into it. I can't do closed transfers as easily. There are some things out there that you can do, but started looking into brew buckets and stainless steel and closed transfers and how you can ferment under pressure. All those little things that you'd like to be able to do as you get into this hobby. So I looked into it and I was ready to pull the trigger on a brew bucket or something along those lines that was stainless steel, and happened to be listening to a Brewlosophy podcast and the different options that are out there. And one of the things they said was using a keg for fermenting. So this is what I ended up moving to. Much cheaper option, but you do get basically the same things that you can go to from going into brew bucket. So stainless steel, obviously it's good for pressure. I don't have problems with that. Some things that you wouldn't want to look into. So the first thing is pull the dip tube out. What most people will talk about is cutting this off using a Dremel or something like that, cutting it off by a couple of inches. So that way at the very bottom, as the trub and yeast fill up, that doesn't get caught up in the bottom of the dip tube. Now, obviously, you run into some issues with that if you are doing dry hopped. Depending on how much you put in there, that could end up coming up over the top of that. It's very difficult to figure that out. So one of the things I used to get away from that is going to the floating dip tube. There's a lot of different names out there, but clear beer system, flexible dip tube. And the key to this system is this, basically. So you have this end that floats, and it would be wherever the wort level, beer level is in there, that would float at that end. This end, the plastic, comes into this dip tube, so that replaces the dip tube that goes in and then just goes right back on the liquid line. Now this happens to be a pin lock keg, but you can do this with a ball lock and it doesn't make any differences with it. With this being set up in here, as the beer ferments and the trub, the yeast, dry hop, any of those types of things falls out to the bottom, this will stay up at the top, and then it'll draw from the top down until it gets to that point and you'll start seeing air bubbles come through. You do closed transfers, all those types of things. I did use the dip tube with it cut a couple of times and ran into problems. I was doing a dry hop beer and ran into problems with it pulling hop debris, getting caught right in the top of this, right here in the liquid outside, coming up through this portion of the post. Got right caught in that poppet that's coming up through there. So it got stuck. I wasn't able to do it, had to take it off. It basically screwed the whole system because oxygen was getting in as you took that off of there. So this is an option that costs, I believe I looked at it this week, $17.99 right now at More Beer. There are other options out there. There's on eBay. There's lots of different things. Amazon sells them. But basically, if you have a keg, again, pin lock, ball lock doesn't make a difference, and you bought that to go with it, you could then have a stainless steel fermenter with the ability to pressure ferment with a spunding valve if you built that. You have the ability to do a closed transfer. You have the ability to easily clean it, again being stainless steel. You can put it on a keg washer. I have a video I'll post on that as well, a homemade one that goes through it. The only real downfall that I've seen in a couple of them, if you're looking to get the yeast back out of it, you want to cultivate your yeast. Obviously not having something that's going to be a bigger vessel and the ability to be able to pull that out from the bottom, a conical, something along those lines, you're not going to be able to do that. And it's 5 gallons tops, plus you have to leave headspace there. So what I've been doing is I've been putting about 4.5 gallons in there and using a defoaming agent to make sure that I don't have problems with it fermenting. So this is an option if you're looking I don't want to spend a couple $100 in a stainless steel fermenter to move up to. For 17 bucks, we all pretty much have a keg sitting around probably that you can ferment into. I had 2 pin locks sitting around that I wasn't using because I'd gone to all ball lock. So I basically am using 2 pin lock kegs to ferment in, and the rest of mine are ball lock, and then I transfer into my ball locks for serving. So, all right, so that's a option for people that are looking to move up. It's kind of why I've done it. So I'm going to do a transfer here in a second, so I'll show you what that looks like. All right, guys, let's go through my process for purging kegs. So I've got my star sand here. I typically keep it in a bucket, clean keg, so we're all set to go with that. I'll put the star sand in this, and then we're going to use a current fermentation CO2 to purge this of the star sand, so we'll have no oxygen left in this. Got a little bit of ice in here. It's after Christmas. We're in between Christmas and New Year's, so it's all filled up. Doing it outside, so I don't make a mess indoors here. Fermentation's happening downstairs, so make sure we get this all purged of any oxygen. So we'll put the cap back on this. Clean this up a little bit. We'll take it downstairs. We'll hook it up. A couple of jumper cables, and I'll show you how I purge a keg. All right, so I have my keg full of star sand down here. This is a keg that's fermenting right now. I have a NEPA in that. It is being pressure fermented. Air was at 6 pounds, something like that. It's working its way up to 10. That's where I've got it set for. One of the nice things, though, is if you have a beer fermenting, you can use the CO2 from that to purge this, especially if you're doing a pressure fermentation. It doesn't affect the yeast at all. The only ones that I've heard of that really are affected by back pressure are your Saison yeast, so it may be something you want to be careful of if you're going to use this process, that you're not using a beer that you're fermenting with a Saison yeast. Most of the rest of the yeast that I've read up on are negatively affected with back pressure. So this fermentation process, you can just pop that spunning valve off. I'm going to use the CO2 that's built up into that to push out and then back into the bucket. Another way to do it is if you have another keg here, you can push from this keg into another one and just have a second keg right here, and then always have a keg of star sand. I just don't have an extra keg right now available for you. So nice thing is having some of these jumper lines with the swivel ends on them. Makes it easy to be able to switch. I do have a tendency, I'm using pin lock for my fermentation, and I use ball lock for my serving. It doesn't make a difference. I just happen to have 2 pin locks. When I first bought into this, I wasn't sure what exactly I was going to use. Found that I like ball lock better for serving. The pin locks were sitting around. I didn't have anything to use them. I was actually going to sell them, and when I started looking around to move into stainless steel buckets, and the whole idea with the stainless steel buckets were to do something with the ability to pressure ferment. I also wanted to close transfer and not have O2 issues, especially if you're making NEPAs. So this process is something I've kind of begged, borrowed, and stealed from a lot of different places. So I'll take you kind of through the process I use. I've just kind of built it off of what I currently do. But it's basically taken from things I've seen online and other YouTubes and podcasts, and just kind of built it into the system I have. So if this can help you, hopefully this will get you through. So I'm going to make up the jumper, and then I will show you how I go ahead and attach these and how it works its way down through. All right, so I got the cable made up here. So again, this is a pin lock. You don't have to have a pin lock to do this. This could be a ball lock keg. This is a ball lock keg. So if your system's a little bit different, or you've got some other kegs around that you want to try this with, if it's ball lock, you could do that. If it's pin lock to pin lock, it doesn't make a difference of what you're doing. I just happen to have pin locks that weren't being used. So that's why I'm fermenting in this. So that is a pin lock gas out, goes down to a ball lock gas. And then I've got just a straight jumper just to a snipped end that's going to be a liquid ball lock out. And then that will go back into the bucket. And again, you could run it into, you could be a liquid at the end of that, could be another liquid in a keg right here. And you could push the star sand right into that keg and have another one ready to go. And then just keep kind of daisy chaining it down. So again, this is kind of how I do it. So we'll get the spunning valve off. Get this put on. So we've got pressure coming through here. It's only a couple pounds right now, so I'm not sure how quickly it's going to work right this second. May have to just let it run here for a little while. So this is something you have to play around with a little bit. So we'll put pressure into this keg. And then from that point, just want to make sure your line's in your bucket. And we'll get that down there a little bit. Build that up a little bit. So all right, so we get that down in there, and we're just gonna push this down, and then she'll start to push fluid out. So she's pushing pretty good right now, actually. So just kind of let this go, and there you go. So again, pressure from fermentation. That's a beer being fermented right now. Pressure comes out, comes down the line, comes into this ball lock. Again, this ball lock is completely full of star sand. So that pressure is going to push the star sand out through that line right into this bucket down here. And then just basically let that go. And you can see it's not running super fast, but it's running fairly quick. So you just let that run until the 5 gallons goes back out. So again, you could run this into another keg if you wanted to. And I think the gravity definitely helped it a little bit. So now I'll have a completely purged keg. I'll leave that here. When this beer is ready to be transferred to serving, we'll transfer it over, and I'll show you through that process too. So we'll give you one last look so you can kind of see. So just have it tiered. All right, that is my process for doing purging of a serving keg using CO2 that's naturally made from fermentation instead of having to use it out of my cylinder. All right, so pressure fermentation. This is my collab beer with Exit 12, Brandon and Nick. This is Saturday Morning Cartoons, so this is a milkshake IPA. So we pressure fermented this at 10 pounds. Now that was sitting at 10 pounds when I put it in my fermentation chamber to do cold crashing, and it had dropped 5 pounds down to the 5 pounds for 3 days. So that pressure, you know, when it condenses in there as it's cold crashing, it's going to pull that pressure down. So it's down to 5 now. I have set my gauge for 10 pounds. Is what I'm going to get that back up to. This gauge is set up. I have a purged, cleaned, sanitized, and then purged. So it filled it up with CO2, filled it up with star sand, capped it, used fermentation from this to push the star sand out. I'll have a video for that already. You've probably seen it. So now, as that's gone through and it's purged out, it's completely oxygen free. I'm just putting it at 10 pounds, so we're basically going to balance this system when we hook this up. I will put another 5 pounds into this and bring that up to 10, so we have a balanced system. I'll pull the poppet there just a little bit, the relief valve, just to bring it down and get the flow starting, and then it'll basically just continue to push through as it goes through. A little bit of a slower system, but no oxygen in this. So I'll get my line set up and show you how that works. All right, so one of the things you want to be careful of is there's obviously oxygen in this. So I put it in sanitizer, and I've put my liquid top on. Now this keg I've already put 10 pounds in, so I can use a little bit of that because I'm going to want this keg a little bit less than the keg I'm coming out of anyways. So one of the things you can do is you can try hooking this up to your CO2 tank, pushing some CO2 through. But if you want to bring this down anyways and you put it up to 10, 12 pounds, just hook it on and then push some oxygen or push some CO2 that I've already put in there. Very careful, bring this end up, pop the liquid out for the pin lock, and you've got a fully purged pigtail line that'll be able to go from here, from this over. So then we'll do the same thing with our CO2 line, and this will be our liquid line. All right, so I've gone through and I've purged both these lines. So I've sanitized and purged both of them. So now I have my liquid line and I have my CO line. So I have two pigtails that will run between the two kegs. You could very easily be a ball lock to ball lock, and then again, ball lock to ball lock liquid, ball lock to ball lock gas. You could do this very easily. Those are just swivel heads on that. Again, I'm using pin lock, so I've got pin lock liquid to ball lock liquid, pin lock gas to ball lock gas. Does the same thing if you were using your pin lock kegs, ball lock kegs to do this in fermenting. It does the same thing. Very easily be able to go through this system. So I'll get this hooked up and show you how it works. All right, guys. So got my lines all purged out. So I have my gas line. I got my liquid line. This is, again, we've used this to purge the lines a little bit here. So taking a couple pounds out of this. This is sitting at about 10 pounds. So what you want to do is you want to hook up to your serving vessel first. What I typically do is I'll go to the gas side first. So pop that on. I'll leave this up here so it's ready to go. Then we're going to go to the liquid outside, again to the serving vessel. And I'm using ball locks for serving and pin locks for my fermentation, but this could very easily be a ball lock as well. Now, once you're all set with this, you're going to go ahead and get ready to push this on. Liquids to start to flow. Once that starts, you can then push this on, and it basically starts this going up and through. All right, so we've got it hooked up, and the beer's flowing down into this vessel, and then the CO2 comes back up and out. Full disclosure, she was pushing just CO2 out of this. Sometimes that floating dip tube at the top doesn't keep the beer right into it, so as it sits kind of up in here, it's supposed to sit just below the beer level. So sometimes you got to just take the side of this and just shake it a little bit, not hard, just a little bit of gentle rocking, get the beer to get back up into it, give it a little bit of pressure, and then she'll start to take off and it'll start feeding. Downfall to this system is it does take longer than typical. So if you're just using gravity flow and don't care about oxygen, then this system takes quite a bit longer. This might be 15-20 minutes depending on the CO2 that you're running on this. So but that will take you through, and then once you see air bubbles start coming up through that side, that'll be the CO2 that starts pulling CO2 out of that vessel. Then you know you're pretty good shape. You can also weigh these so you have an idea. If you want to put a scale under it, you'd know how much you have. I believe I've weighed them before full of star sand, and they're 50 some odd pounds, maybe 52, 53 pounds. I think I've come up with somewhere in that range. So that's something else. If you're coming from a vessel that you know you have more fluid than what this can hold, then I would definitely suggest having a scale under that so you'd know and you're not overflowing. Or you can just keep the poppets open, but that does cause an issue if you're not on this. You could push beer back up through that. So it's something to take a look at. I know that's one of the nice things about using this. It's 4.5 gallons. I know that will hold it and it's not a problem. People will say, well, you're not getting a full 5 gallons. That's true. I'm not. So I just brew a little more often, which is fine with me too. It gives me a chance to change it over. So sometimes you don't like having a full 5. So it's just the option going through. All right. So that is basically the system that I have set up for doing closed transfers. So hope this helps somebody. Hope you guys have a great day. Sla'inte. All right, guys, I thought I might show you what I use for my keg washing system. So a lot of people use the Mark keg washing system. I basically looked online. I'm cheap, so fortunately it's snowing out here, so it'd be a little interesting doing this. But basically what I'm using is I have a pond pump. Same pond pump I use for pumping water through my chiller out of my pool. It's definitely a couple of gallons a minute, so this is a bigger pond pump. It's got pretty good push through it. I took a piece of PVC, put a top on it, put a bunch of holes screwed into there, took a flared fitting, put some line on it so that I can run it back up through the out port on my kegs as I go through it, so that way if you can see on the inside, so you can clean the inside of that, your dip tube. going through. So, and I can change, I use pin locks for fermenting. So I'm cleaning my fermenter first, and then I'm going to clean my serving, which is ball lock. So I just switch those over, and they're just the screw-on types. So that way you can switch between the two. So that's what I'm using. And this is just a piece of hose. That's just a clamp on the end of that, so I can get it to work. I think what I used is, let's see here. See if I've got it on there. So what is that, 1 inch pipe? So just like Home Depot sells it by, the 2 foot length. I just bought a cap for it. So it works for me. So I'll get this set up and I'll show you what it looks like when it's running. All right, so that's the keg washing system that I've set up. So I got the 2 pieces of metal. That's actually old tent stakes over the top of it. Pumps in the inside, so just a submersible pump. I got the pin lock fitting on there, so I'm running the cleaner through that. And I have, this one actually has a floating dip tube in it, so that way it don't get caught with all the junk and stuff in there, the dry hopping, that type of stuff. So just goes right back into it. I'll let it run, good hot water cleaner in there. Let it run for 10-15 minutes, and I'll switch over and move the other keg on top of it, just change the fitting on the end. So I don't know if this will help somebody out. It's a cheap way of doing a homemade keg cleaner and fermenter cleaner for me as well. So, all right, I gotta get back inside and check on my boil.